Okay, you can begin now.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope everyone is hearing me clearly. My name is Whitney Paul, and with me is my partner Ryan Payne. And for this chapter, chapter 6, we'll be presenting to you Leading with Integrity and Moral Purpose. So to begin, I have a question for the class, and Sir also if he wants to answer. You recently started a new job at a grocery store. The manager of the store always doing paperwork upstairs. With you, there are 5 other employees, but every day you see those other employees eating stocks that are sold in the store. But when you ask them if they have purchased the items, they said no. We do this all the time and the manager never knows. What would you do in that situation? Anybody? Anybody? Okay, I guess
I
nobody
would
want to
tell the
answer.
manager.
Okay, tell the manager. Anybody
Yeah,
else?
seek any company's interest and tell the manager as well. I would do that.
Okay, cool. Anybody else before I turn to the next
Yeah,
slide?
I would speak to the individual first, let her know what she is doing is wrong, and if it is she does not do the correct thing by paying for the items, then I will escalate it to her supervisor.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, but everybody doing it. So who's you? You just reach and you want to sell out everybody? What kind of nonsense is that?
Yes, sir. I sell not everybody we.
Chill your piggy and let the people eat now. You don't know what's going on there. You don't know why. Maybe the man don't pay them properly.
Well, in a
Okay.
case like that, so I understand the point.
Yeah, honestly, I might mind my business for a little while first,
Okay,
and
that's
then if I realize that it is something that is continuing, then I will talk to them first, and then I will escalate it to the manager. I'll mind my business first.
okay, that's fair. That's fair. So moving forward. When in this situation like this, what do we do? So we are basically left with 2 options. 1, trying to resolve them, or 2, pretending we didn't notice. And I think that was Ms. Jackson who said she'll mind your business. Yeah, so we'll do Ms. Jackson and mind our business. But both of these options have consequences. Avoiding the situation can leave you troubled, but reaching quickly to it can procure careful thoughts about all the aspects of the situation. So avoiding the situation will leave you trouble means that, you see them doing it, yes, but in the back of your mind, your conscience beating you to do something about it, but you decide, you know what, this is then not my business, so you're staying out of it. But you know you want to do something about it, but you're not going to do anything about it. And reaching quickly to try to resolve it can also be a consequence because 1, you never really find out, according to Sir, why they're doing what they're doing. And you just want to take it upon yourself and try to fix the problem. That is also another consequence. So, solutions. Some solutions to deal with this. 1, we need to slow the process down and reflect on ethical and moral aspects of actions and decisions. 2, try to involve others in helping to adjust the situation. And 3, one can reflect on the rational leadership model, which indicates that resolving ethical dilemmas is better in a group as it can lead to more informed decisions and solutions. So therefore, that last part basically says, don't try to, resolve it by yourself. You see something happening, you try to involve someone else, the peer who's not doing what they're doing, and for you all to come up with a situation and try to fix this problem.
I think that would have been relational leadership models, huh?
Yeah, relational, yes, leadership
Yes,
models.
there's a bit of a typo there, so you want to
Yeah.
correct that.
Okay. So what this chapter 6, basically talks about is 3 elements, which is 1, creating and sustaining an ethical organizational environment. 2, an analysis of the moral dimensions of transforming leadership theory. And 3, examination of the ethical influence that participants have on their organizations through behavior modeling. So I will now take you through the first element. Understanding and applying ethical theories and models that operate from organizational values and codes of conduct, as well as being aware of your own moral development and that of others in your organization, help to create and sustain ethical organizational environments. So Nash 1990 proposes 4 qualities that are necessary for participants to advance the ethical standards in an organization. So 1, he says, critical thinking skills to analyze and convey the ethical components of a problem or dilemma. To me, I would basically describe this as where when you have a problem, you try to, you think about it first by weighing out the pros and the cons, the positive and the negative about the situation before you try and fix it for yourself. 2, a high degree of integrity to stand up for your personal and professional ethics. I will describe this as always trying to do the right thing and standing up for what is right, no matter what the situation is. And being honest and being trustworthy are central to integrity. 3, the ability to see situations from other perspectives, showing concern for others. And I will say this is where you try to put yourself in other situation and try to understand them from that point then. And always having an open mind and listening to what others have to say before you give your opinion. And 4, personal motivation to do the right thing. Even though sometimes for us the right thing may not be what we want to do, it's best to try and push yourself to do what you know is right, but not what you think is right. You know that is right, so you try to do what is right. It is important when we use these ethical decision-making models and principles that you be aware to prepare 1, criticism from others, 2, see members revolve, or 3, perhaps experience a decline in membership. You see, not everyone in an organization has a moral orientation or is prepared, or willing to do the right thing. And I think most of us can see this in our daily life, in our organization, or wherever we may be operating. Some will prefer to take the easy way out and basically do what is more economical or take the path of less resistance. So Nash's idea of having personal courage is of utmost importance when trying to make the right decision for the good of an organization in the face of opposition from the membership. Part of the leadership process is to fully explain to others the problem at hand and the basis of the action or the decision. But these 4 qualities of leadership, when translated into behavior and action, help to create an ethical organizational environment. When you identify a problem as having moral or ethical implications and involve others in the decision-making process, you provide another example of how ethical environment is established. Several strategies and intervention can be used to create and maintain an ethical climate in a group or organizational setting. The process of doing so should be intentional and include all the elements of the rational leadership model, the relational leadership model, and the dimension of knowing being done. All participants, positional leaders and members alike, should be equally empowered to set a tone in the organizational climate that will foster and support ethical and moral actions and sensitivities. The organization's mission or the group's common purpose should be the driving force for identifying its values. Participants should identify and operate from a shared set of core values that guide the organization's actions, activities, and decisions. These core values will enable individuals to work towards a common purpose and provide a common understanding of the organization's principles and standards. So for me, where I work at Sugar Farm, and we have 5 core values. Every morning, we have a huddle And in the huddle, we basically talk about the sales we had before, the sales we intend to make today, and we always add one of our core values into our huddles. So example of one of our core values is that we do the right thing. We do the right thing can mean anything that is good, but within the organization, we try to focus on what the right thing is then. So example of doing the right thing is that, okay, you see a customer on the aisle, they look like they're looking for something, you're searching for something, you do the right thing by asking if they want assistance. How may I help you? But still try to maintain that social distance as the whole, the corona thing now. Say maintain your social distance and still try to help out a customer. You come in and you try to get them out the store as quick as possible, especially the older ones. Another example of doing the right thing, you see stuff in the aisle like boxes. You might have someone might be packing up boxes and then put it back or put it to throw away, or you see trolleys in the aisle or baskets in the aisle. You just do the right thing by moving it. That could stop you from hampering yourself and hampering your coworkers or even a customer. Members are empowered to hold each other accountable, participate in moral talk, and work towards a sustained and ethical environment. But appointing one person to be the group standard bearer will not achieve the same ethical climate as when all participants are concerned with doing what is right. In fact, it may be counterproductive for a leader to handle ethical dilemmas alone or in isolation from other members of the organization. To contrast with this, we had two writers, Killerman 2014 and Lipman Blumen 2005, who both address bad and toxic leaders and their resulting negative consequences. So Kellyman divide bad leadership into two categories, where she believed bad as in ineffective and bad as unethical. So her definition of ineffective leaders include the failure to achieve a desired change, whereas unethical leadership fails to distinguish between what is right and what is wrong. Lipman Blumen, on the other side, described toxic leaders as those who engage in numerous destructive behaviors and who exhibit certain dysfunctional personal characteristics. To count as toxic, these behaviors and qualities of character must inflict some reasonably serious and enduring harm on their followers and the organization. So here are some examples of behaviors and traits associated with toxic leaders. So we have the first one as these toxic leaders leaving their followers worse off than they found them. We have two, violating the basic standards of human rights of their own supporters, as well as those of others, individuals and groups they do not count among their followers. Three, consciously feeding their followers illusions that enhance the leader's power and impair the followers' capacity to act independently. So number three is basically persuading followers that they are the only ones who could save them and the organization then. Four, playing to the basis fears and needs of the followers, misleading followers to deliberate untruths and misdiagnose of issues and problems, insatiable ambition that prompts leaders to put their own sustained power, glory, and fortune above their followers' well-being, enormous egos that blind leaders to the shortcoming of their own character, and thus limit their capacity for self-renewal, reckless disregard for the cost of their actions to others as well as themselves, and cowardice that leads them to shrink from difficult choices. Thinking on the positive side a little more now, what is rewarded and recognized often teaches others about what is acceptable and unacceptable behavior within an organization. Creating awards and recognition for members who help sustain an ethical environment by taking risks to do the right thing is a powerful way to publicly acknowledge and prompt ethical behaviors. On the other side of the award continuum, unethical behavior should be addressed, but in a different manner. Public humiliation was a practice commonly used in the past to confront and punish violators of the law or ethical standards. Some cultures, I believe, still continue that practice today. Participants have the shared responsibility of confronting individuals who violate the organization's standards and practices.
And so the concept you're talking about there is called public shaming. Unfortunately, in our society, this is kind of backfired because some people have such warped sense of values that they sometimes perceive themselves, or some people in society perceive them as heroes if they are going against those values that we may hold as commonality among ourselves. So that gives rise to the situation where somebody's a crime, a criminal in society, and yet still the community around them doesn't view them as a criminal; they view them as a hero, and that is where you start to have that problem. So public shaming would not work in an environment like that if it were a technique that was going to be utilized. So it's kind of tricky in using that system. All right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Go ahead.
Okay. Um, so three choices when values and principles clash with the organization standards. Individuals committed to lead with integrity face their own dilemma of what to do when their values and principles clash with the organization standards. This is a very difficult situation and offers only three choices. One, you could either ignore or put up with the situation. So this is basically the first option where it had you turn one of the option where at the beginning you turn a blind eye to the situation and just you mind your business. So either you mind your business through the whole time that you are this organization and just put up with whatever unethical behaviors that you see going on. Two, adjust the situation and work to change the organizational climate into one that is ethical in nature. So you try different ways, but not by yourself. So you involve others. You notice some things need to change, and you come together to your manager, to your toxic leader, and try to make him or her change her ways or change certain things that within the organization so you all can have a better or an ethical environment then. Or three, you could just leave the organization. So it's either one, you ignore it too much the way you can't take it no more, or two, you try to adjust it, nothing never happened. Maybe the both of them you try. So you know what, this is not for you. So you ups and leave. So I will now pass you on to Ryan, who will do the other two elements of this chapter 6.
Today, everyone, I will be touching on transforming leadership theory. Now, transforming leadership theory is a theory that includes a strong component of ethics and morals. It is James McGregor and James theory, right? According to Burns, transforming leadership reaches moral dimensions when the leaders and participants' behavior and ethical aspirations are elevated by mutual influences on one another. A transforming leader is a leader that he oozes confidence and he pass it on to his subordinates and to those around him. Transforming leadership, it is also seen as a process in which leaders and followers raise one another to higher levels of morality and motivation. So that's it passes it on, and together everybody try to do the right thing, I should say. Right? An important thing to note about transforming leaders is that they are value driven. They have a core set of values that are consistent with their actions. They don't just talk the talk, they walk the talk. Right? And the moral purpose of both leaders and participants are the key factors in the transforming leadership process. There are several ways in which a leader can inspire others to higher levels of morality. Like that's some examples would be through influence, through modeling behaviors that become the standards for others to follow. So if you know that your boss is someone that always strives to do the right thing and he doesn't accept shortcuts or doing anything wrong, the person under him, they will try their best to do the right thing because they know if they try to go and cut corners, he will not accept it and they might just have to do it over or they might get a taken off. All right, moving on to the other slide.
This one. Did it move? It's down.
The other thing that we're going to touch on is making ethical decisions as leaders using the relational leadership model. I was touched on a bit by Ms. Paul. We need to learn to slow the process down, as she mentioned, and reflect on the ethical and moral aspects of actions and decisions. If you are used to resolving ethical dilemmas quickly, then it might be a challenge for you to stop, reflect on the situation, involve others in helping to address it, and weigh all possible alternatives of action. The key is to allow yourself and others some time to work through complex problems and to engage in a process that includes reflection before action. All right, moving on. Because leaders are the most visible people in organizations, their actions and values reflect on all of those who are involved. This is according to Melissa Shalata, right? And it is because of that the leaders in many organizations are seen as the key role models. And if participants admire or identify with a leader, they will be more likely to imitate that person's behavior. Social learning theory provides a framework for understanding how individuals learn from others. Models in an organization are capable of eliciting ethical or unethical behavior. Exemplars or models significantly influence the ethical decision making in organizations. And this goes from the top down, could be the head of our organization, the supervisor, could even be the person who now joined the organization. If when they come in, they have a certain way of they doing things, they have a certain level of ethics of in their actions, people could begin to model them. I don't know if you all could take a look, like wherever you are working, um the person who always tries to do the right thing, that person could, in some organization, he could be someone that a lot of people just look up to, or according to how the organization is planning out, that could be somebody who is kind of ostracized and pushed aside because they might call him a goody two shoe or something like that. So the doing the right thing is sometimes one of the most difficult things to do according to the organization you find or situation you find yourself in. Moving on to the next slide. As I said, it's a very difficult thing, and some will say that is an act of courage, right? Sharon Watkins, a former executive of Enron, displayed personal courage when she exposed breaches of conduct by her boss, Ken Lay, symbolizing that individual actions matter and that you have to take ownership for your actions when you are in a position of leadership. If we look closer to home, I could say in Guyana, just prior to the elections, where they had a vote of no confidence, and the member for of the government that voted against his own colleagues, because at the time he thought that was the right thing to do. It wasn't the most popular decision, but it was a very courageous one, and it led to a series of events that now has a new government installed in Guyana. So being ethical and being moral in organizations is definitely an act of courage. Moving on to the next slide. Moral courage can be viewed as the intersection of three conceptual fields: principles, danger, and endurance. You have to have endurance because, as I said, you won't be popular. People will come at you. People will call you names. They might even come at your family. And once you know that you are standing up for the right thing, sometimes you have to just dig in there and ride the wave as it goes. And that's how it goes. It took moral courage for Nelson Mandela to be in prison for 18 years for his opposition to be to get to lead in South Africa, right? And he is one of the most inspirational people of the last century or so. Moving on to the next slide. Um, we are looking at 8 assumptions about ethical leadership. This is by Lucas and Anello. This was done in 1995. The first is that ethics is the heart of leadership. If you have if you are unethical and people see you for being an unethical person, unless you're in a criminal organization, your leadership won't really last long. All leadership is values driven, because as a leader you must be seen as someone who has values, and you stand up for something. Personal values intersect with organizational values. Ethical leadership can be learned, and it can, because as you go into an organization, you learn the organizational culture and you grow into the organization. Next slide. Ethical leadership involves a connection between ethical thought and action. And this is important because, as we alluded to in the previous slides, ethical decisions require significant thought, and then you act. Character development is an essential ingredient of ethical leadership. As someone who is known to be guided by ethics, it helps to develop your character. Ethical leadership is a shared process, especially it have different models of ethical leadership that is relational and so on, that helps where you involve other people in the decision making and so on. And everything we do teaches. And if you this number 8, if you think about it, it will also guide you to do the right thing. Because if you know that everything that you do teaches, you know that people will be looking at what you do, and some may be actually trying to learn what you do. And if you do the wrong thing, then you're going to be teaching them the wrong thing. Um, Moving on to the next slide. We're going on to the ethical theories and moral purpose. Ethical theories provide a glimpse of how human judgments are made and the thought processes individuals engage in to solve ethical dilemmas and other problems. It can be traced back to the philosopher kings such as Aristotle, Plato, and Socrates, as well as to 18th and 19th century philosophers and scholars such as Immanuel Kant and John Stuart. All right, moving on. Modeling a moral purpose. If participants admire or identify with another member or leader, they will become more likely to imitate that person's behavior. We talk about social learning theory provides that, and models in an organization are capable of eliciting ethical or unethical behavior. Examples of models significantly influence the ethical decision making in an organization. All right, moving on. Modeling can also have external effects that extend beyond organizational boundaries. Ben Cohen and Jerry Greenfield of Ben and Jerry's Ice Cream modeled a type of socially responsible behavior in the business world when they donated pre-tax profits to social programs. By doing this, Ben and Jerry attempted to model a standard for other business leaders to follow. Ben and Jerry's also pride themselves on um on making their products with cage-free dairy. That is one of their major marketing promises.
What is
Right?
that? Cage free?
Yeah, they say they use happy cows to get their milk. So
Also, all right. So they
they are not,
pre-wean,
yeah, they are not,
pre-wean. Okay.
yeah, they are not locked in pens and so on. They are free and they are happy up to when they
Roam
are
around
producing them.
and feed on
Yeah,
the grass and whatnot. Okay, cool.
yeah. Next
Um,
slide.
can I
Yes, sir.
ask a question before you started? When you all were talking, both of you can answer or respond to this. When you all were talking about some of the other areas there in terms of when you go into a new organization, your personal values and the organizational values have to coincide with each other. Did you all come across the concept of cognitive dissonance?
So that is what you discussed with when you was talking about one of, I think it's chapter 1 or 2.
It came up in chapter 1 and 2, but it should have come up here as well, especially when you're talking about where leadership, especially when a new person comes into an organization and the they're learning the culture of the other organization. We talked about there being a match between the individual's values and the culture of the organization. There needs to be an intersection between the two. But when you do come across situations where there isn't uh, that, or you have big gaps the um, between the two, it can lead to that situation of cognitive dissonance, where you know in your mind this whatever you're doing is wrong, but because the organization is is promoting this particular idea or operating in this particular manner, you continue to do it, and that kind of makes people feel very uncomfortable with a situation. Eventually, they can leave an organization as you identified, and the options available for somebody who runs across a situation where their own personal ethical values are being infringed upon by the organization. So I was just wondering if you all came across that in your reading there,
Yeah,
um, and made it a connection with that. All right,
yeah.
all right,
Just
continue.
next slide, please. All right. I just want to take a moment for you all to think. Have you ever found yourself in an organizational meeting or in a classroom or even like with friends in which someone raises an ethical or moral question around a particular issue that the group is working on or they may be working on, and you all start to discuss it? Anybody?
I have been in a situation like that, yes.
Yeah. We got one of the from listening to people, one of the most common ethical issues you might like I hear from women in organizations might be like someone in a higher position making a pass at them or something, and they feel uncomfortable and they want to know what they should do. And
Mm-hmm.
that is an example. Like, what is the ethical thing to do? in that situation? Is it you're going to report the person, you're going to talk to them, or anybody ever encounter that?
Is it like something like sexual harassment?
But yeah,
That example that you're drawing there?
yeah, something like that. And then there are different things too, like the initial incident where you saw someone probably stealing something on work,
Okay.
and they put
Well, go ahead.
you go ahead, you go ahead.
Okay, well, I currently have a manager right now where an employee raised the issue that with respect to sexual harassment, that they are in a relationship and it's currently under investigation in our human resource department, because the manager is also alleging that that is not true and is a whole big foray right now. And we have an ethical code or principle where employees are not supposed to fraternize with each other.
Yeah,
Yeah, that tends to be a rule in general that companies try to use, but it doesn't quite work out
yeah,
because especially if you're working with each other,
for a
there's a
period of time.
tendency, yeah, for a very long period of time. Sometimes it's just a short period of time. Relationships can develop. So the reasonable thing there would be to try to deal with it. I've seen too many organizations try to run outlaw
Yeah,
that type of relationship between people. But if you're working with an organization and you're spending a lot of time there, which a lot of organizations request or require out of their employees, there's a great likelihood that you're going to start to be attracted to somebody with whom you're working. So I think your HR department, for instance, Ms. Ren, needs to be a little more proactive with the thing. They can't just say you draw a line and say um, you can't get involved with somebody in your workplace, because despite having that rule, it will happen.
So I can vouch to that because that happened to me.
How will that happen to you?
It is it is where I work. Well, I said at Super Farm. I used to work at the Westmoreland branch, and as you said, spending so much time with your coworker, I guess he got to see my trying to have my personal information, guys. He got to see my true self then, so I wasn't really hiding anything. At the point, that was my coworker, so nothing to hide. I didn't like him at the beginning, so you will go to work not really caring how you look at sometimes. So I guess that's really fault for. And at this current moment, I had to be removed from the Westmoreland branch to the Diego Martin branch because again that was one of the rules that you can't have relationship within the workplace.
Yeah, that's a short-sighted approach to it.
Yeah.
But are you all engaged in a relationship now?
Yeah, we actually are still together.
Right, but I mean, I've seen it. That is a strategy that companies use. That when and if a relationship does develop, I've been in a situation where it's not just casual relationships or budding relationships like that, but people actually get married and stuff. What
Yeah.
their reaction is to separate the two of you all from each other, and there's a reason for that. Miss Owen, Miss Ren, you could tell us why.
What's that, sir?
Why would they tend
Mhm.
to separate employees who are related to each other, or develop relationships with each other from working together?
Um, hmm.
Can you get the logic of that?
Not really, because I mean we also have a policy where um you cannot have a relative working in the same department as you. I really don't understand why. That doesn't
But
really
sir,
make
I can.
sense.
I could tell
I
you
can.
from my job perspective why we always tend to separate. I work in the protective services, and if you if two persons are in a relationship and they find themselves in a confrontational situation involving violence, right, like a perpetrator, rather than do what might be the right thing, they will more than likely try to defend for each other, because this is a person that you have a level of feelings for. So definitely in our setting, it is try to separate them and keep them apart.
And that is that's the primary thinking that organizations have, that in a crunch,
yeah, that's true.
people might behave in a more subjective manner and
Well, not only that, sir.
Mhm.
Like in terms of the general workplace,
Mm-hmm.
um, it can affect the job itself as well too, which means the
Yeah.
day-to-day activities of the job could be affected.
Yes,
Because if I and a coworker be in a relationship together, and that person chips me off first thing in the morning, it could be confrontation, as Mr. Payne said. And
Mhm.
next thing you know, I'm so late in the office. Everybody know my business. That big shoo. But
Well, not only that, because there's an inability to be able to separate work life from home life. You bring your home problems.
that's right, sir.
And
But
people
sir, I can tell you something. Where
what's
I work in, we actually had people who got married and then they actually worked in the same departments and they kept them right there.
well, and has it affected things negatively, or have there been?
No,
Yes.
actually, it didn't because when they wanted to move the wife, they couldn't move the wife because she got pregnant.
Oh, wow.
Yes, and
Well,
the husband, even though the wife drives, the husband drives the both of them to work because she
Yeah,
was kind of like a high risk now.
right, during a pregnancy, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, so but it have husband and wife working by me, and they haven't. We don't have a separate like the separate area to send them.
Should I have to
Yeah,
stay there?
yeah. So you can't actually physically distance them from each other.
No,
Okay.
no.
Yeah.
Now,
but actually,
again, you see, this is a problem because a lot of small businesses today start from family. It's a family-run business, so it's really families that are working together and building an organization. When it becomes larger and larger, then the organization becomes more formalized, and you can start to so let's put it. You can't say you're in a family organization and you're telling people you can't have a relationship in the thing. But then that means half the people you are working for you are to go home. You understand? So
well,
because
so I think in our case with our company too, I think they also tried to rule out, fraudulent activity and behavior, because we had
yeah,
an
because
instance
there's
where
data. Mhm.
we had an instance where an employee had a relationship with an officer, and that officer influenced her to add on some time for payroll purposes for duties that he didn't work.
Yeah, well, she
Wow.
had.
And
Let me put it this way: she had to have serious ethical issues herself if she would
If you
have
were like that.
she would
Yeah.
have done something like that. Because, and this is why the discussion
yeah,
that we're having
it
here is
did.
very useful. Because not because somebody that you care about. Well, first off,
If you do something
if
wrong.
somebody truly cared about you, they would have not asked her to do that. Let's put it that way.
Exactly.
True. That is true.
She should have recognized that that individual doesn't have her best interest at heart to ask her
No.
to falsify information like that, because the person who's going to be at most risk there was the
So,
It's her.
person who um who falsified the data.
Yeah, she was suspended. She got a
Of
month
lucky
suspension.
she still get
a
suspended.
month.
Lucky she
That's
didn't know
Yeah,
what
a
that.
month
That's
immediate
suspension.
dismissal.
that's exposed. Yeah, that is.
That's immediate dismissal. Both parties would have been sent to.
Yep.
Yep.
All right,
Yeah, well,
because
he was on suspension too, and had to go back on suspension for that as well. So he
uh,
got double suspension.
Also, he
Wow.
just totally unethical.
Exactly.
Yes, he was. He was.
then why is the organization entertaining those individuals working for them?
Get rid of them.
What
Because
organization?
our management knows no better. Same thing, they're unethical as well.
No,
Wow.
no. What organization? Is it a public service organization or private
No, it's a
sector?
private security firm.
Or worse yet, and that's probably family related as well.
Yeah.
More than likely.
Now, sir, in the public service, they would have asked you to resign, and then we'll get you a nice fancy letter so you can get a better job somewhere else.
Well, that's because they tend to downplay it, and that has to do with
Yeah.
the issue of public shaming. Because when the same thing we went back, which we started to talk about with the fact that public shaming doesn't seem to work, it's because a lot of times leaders of organizations are reluctant to sully somebody's reputation because of the litigious nature of our society now. Anytime you do anything, everybody ready to take you to court and sue you for defamation of character and all kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And to avoid litigation of that nature, an organization may simply, um, sweep that situation under the cover and don't follow through in terms of if they are, what's you would want to do, if they need to be prosecuted and that kind of stuff. Um, it's a difficult. I remember a situation that I ran into when I first started working at Costat. I encountered a student attempting to steal equipment from the fourth floor on city campus, and I interrupted his theft. And myself and another lecturer were actually saw him with it. He was trying to take a monitor when flat screens first came out or started to become popular. He took a flat screen and was walking out with it,
How
and
was
he put it
passing
on
by
the,
the security?
sorry.
How was he passing by the security with that?
He put it under his shirt, and then he was going to go down to the
Wow.
basement and walk out from the basement. See, because
Oh.
there's no security down in the basement there. And he was gonna chuck it in a car or some nonsense like that, right? But my point being, I saw him, I called another lecturer, and he also saw it. But when it came time to writing reports about the situation, the other lecturer refused to write report because he was afraid, because the fellow living in a bad area and he don't want to open himself up to being attacked or victimized by the student or their family. And I found it was such a, what's the word I want? It lacked courage. That, which is what we're talking
Yeah.
about here. Just make
Moral
a
courage.
stand. You have to have courage to stand the consequences of upholding good behavior. Because just like bad behavior has consequences, upholding good behavior sometimes has consequences as well. It's called whistleblowing. For those of you who may be familiar with that term, um, when somebody comes out of an organization and blows the whistle on bad behavior that's taking place that nobody knew about, they tend to be ostracized by the company and by society until the truth of the story comes out about the individuals and what they were actually doing. And that was the case with Enron. I think you used that example, Mr. Payne,
Yeah.
which came from the tech.
Whistleblower. Yeah, it was
But
whistleblower.
right, but we've had whistleblowers here in Trinidad who have also run into that same thing, because they are usually, one of the techniques that you deal with a whistleblower is you try to discredit them by saying this is a disgruntled employee and they got fired because they were doing nonsense in the organization, and then people just write them off. But the truth of the matter is that what those individuals are talking about may actually be um, true about what the organization is doing or not doing, as the case might be. But the organization has more social presence than an individual, and more resources to be able to browbeat that individual into taking back what they said publicly. So this is where you have the conflict between the ethical values of the individuals conflicting with the ethical behavior of organizations and vice versa. Right? So some people behave badly, and when an organization tries to instill its values on them, this is where you run into conflict. So I think what Mr. Payne is getting us into here is a very important aspect of the process of developing ethical values and defining our ethical values by engaging in something called moral talk. Yes, Mr. Payne?
Moral talk. Yes.
Moral
Yes,
talk.
sir.
That's what you're trying to get us into. You see what you caused.
Yes. Moral talk. Yes.
So pick it up from there and continue. Great, guys, I
All right.
congratulate you on
Next
your
slide,
contribution.
Ms. Payne. Yes, as we just engaged in there, as alluded to, moral talk. Um, Moral talk brings out, it arouses feelings and connection with moral action. For the modeling effect to occur, the language in moral talk must be connected to the experiences and expectations of people involved in an organization. Just as you all would have just expressed your different experiences in your various organizations. Moral talk can be used as a type of modeling influence when the dialogue is used to identify problems, consider issues, advocate, criticize policies. For example, if you're working in an organization and there's no ethical standards to begin with, you could criticize that and you could call for one for ethical, a code of ethics that would guide the organization's decision making and so on, and justify and explain decisions. Right? If your decision is ethical and it was done with good faith, then you could you could easily justify that. However, unfortunately, individuals often hesitate to participate in moral talk or discussions about ethical dilemmas because it requires one to put themselves out there and to take a stance. And a lot of people in society find themselves just sitting on the fence. They wait for others to make the decision, and then they will say, all right, okay. Or they might not agree with it and they will go and complain in a corner, but they won't actually stay up and say, well, this is not right. And this lack of discussion about ethics is referred to as moral muteness. Right? Moving on to the next slide. We taking a look at ethical decision making models. These models encourage people to work through dilemmas with a moral purpose in mind and provide frameworks which will guide decision making and analysis. Rather than react quickly to dilemmas, you should carefully consider various steps, including ethical analysis towards making sound decisions. Right? The leadership process is filled with a daily ethical dilemmas and problems that do not have readily identifiable solutions and that leaders and participants need to confront to resolve. Leaders and participants together need to be reflective, challenging, caring, purposeful, and consultative when working through ethical issues. There are several approaches you can use to resolve ethical dilemmas. Moving on to the next slide, we'll take a look at some of those approaches. Right? These models encourage people to work through dilemmas with a moral purpose in mind, guide decision making analysis rather than react quickly to dilemmas. Next slide. Imagine this scenario. You attend a college that has a strict academic honor code calling for community members to turn in anyone who violates the code. You are also the president of the infraternity council. During an exam, you notice a fraternity brother who is also one of your best friends cheating from another classmate. How do you go about confronting this situation? Anybody want to share how they would confront the situation?
Now, just to encourage people to engage in this, midterm activity, one of the big questions actually centers around this practical application model here. So engaging in it now will be useful for later on, okay? So is there nobody going to add their 2 cents?
I think I would raise my hand and tell the instructor.
Okay.
All right.
So that's one response. Anybody else wants to respond?
I would just ignore it.
You just ignore it, okay?
Okay.
It's an
Well,
option.
I would do the same. I would ignore it at first, but I would let the person know I saw them and what they did was wrong.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. So there's a host of options to do, but
There's a whole, um,
let's yeah.
and the thing about it is, there are scenarios like this, and many other scenarios that your choice must be seen as the right choice, and the right choice may not actually be. There are certain ethical dilemmas that where there's a clear right and a clear wrong, but the true crust of ethical decision making is when there is no really wrong choice to make. There is just there's right choices, but which one will affect the greater? Which one will cause the greater good,
All
and so
right.
on.
That's
Kidder,
excellent because
and this is
that is exactly what. Sorry, Mr. Payne.
yeah,
That's exactly what a dilemma is. A dilemma is a situation that has no clearly defined right or wrong answer or response.
yeah,
Sometimes, even though there may be a clearly right approach, it's not correct in the
correct.
circumstance that it finds itself coming up. So let's look at the models that he's going to develop here and see how it goes.
Uh, First, I want to touch on what Kidder defines a tough choice as. He says that a tough choices are those that pit one right value against another. The really tough choices then do not center upon right versus wrong. They involve right versus right. They are genuine dilemmas precisely because each side of the problem is firmly rooted in one of our basic core values. An ethical dilemma then is one those right versus right situation which two core moral values come into conflict to distinguish such dilemmas from the right versus wrong issues that produce moral temptations. One of those things that I could think about off the top of my head is euthanasia, where you have a family member in hospital, they are in a coma, what we commonly refer to as brain dead. Um, the doctors give you the option. They say you could hold on and wait for a miracle, or you could make the choice now to pull the plug and basically end the person's life. When you think about it, if you hold on 2 3 years down the line and the person doesn't come through, you're practically condemning that person to 2 or 3 years further of suffering. And if you decide to end it now, you're ending the suffering for the person and probably for other family members. There's really no right or wrong choice there, but it is a choice that is a decision that has to be made. Right? Moving on to the next slide. He we're looking at the four dilemma paradigm model for decision making by Kidder. Right? He talks about justice versus mercy. He says fairness and equality, equity conflict with compassion, empathy, and love. Then there's short term versus long term. Immediate needs run counter to future goals. Individual versus community. Self versus others, or small group versus larger group. Sometimes you have a decision to make, and it could benefit you or your organization, and it could cut off others. One of these, one of the one of the things off my head I could think about similarly to this individual versus community would be the recent fiasco in terms of the Trinidad and Tobago Football Association and their battle against FIFA, where the elected TTFA decided to take a stance based on ethics because they said that they would have seen certain wrong things happening within the organization and they wanted to put it right. And FIFA came in and brought in a normalization community and they fought against it. And in doing so, Trinidad and Tobago is now suspended from football. But there is an injunction which would allow them to play in the upcoming um, Caribbean tournament. However, this ethical stance by this group of individuals for the TTFA has now affected the entire football community in Trinidad and Tobago. And it is a decision that they would have thought of and they went ahead with, and now the community has to face the consequences.
But
And then
can you not look at the same dilemma that they're facing there and look at it from short term to long term? Because in the short run, it might create a lot of difficulties as we are excluded from international competition and stuff. But in the long run, it
it
may
may
bring FIFA.
it may bring change.
So it may be correct needed change because FIFA is not no angel here. Because I've been following that particular thing, and FIFA themselves encouraged a set of unethical behavior by the former leader that I think requires further investigation.
For the analysis, yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, FIFA has been fraught with corruption ever since whenever. I mean, going back to even before Sepp Blatter and all that stuff that took place there. I mean, my history with FIFA is a little longer than some people because I've been around it, but they've had an unending history of misallocation of resources and browbeating small countries into following their rules. I don't know if you all remember the last World Cup we had in Brazil, how they made Brazil change its own laws to allow the consumption of alcohol in stadiums, which they had outlawed
Yeah.
in Brazil because of the violence
Violence. Yeah.
that came up alongside alcohol consumption. But you had this law that people required them to overturn their own legislation. For it was ridiculous, and that to me is so. Again, the point what I'm trying to make is that you can use either one of these models here or these
Dilemma.
the paradigms to
Yeah.
view a solution for your problem. Do you look at it from justice versus mercy?
Yeah.
Do you look at it from long term and short term, individual versus community, or truth versus loyalty? So, are we going to be loyal to FIFA and forget about the truth, or do we hold to the truth and um, forget about the loyalty of the relationship? That might work its way in the FIFA thing, but if you start to bring a more personalized situation, let's say you're dealing with an organization, let's say at work, or coming back to that whole issue of the student who was cheating in the exams. Do you say something because that's it's about the truth, or do you say nothing because that's your friend? So how do you justify why what your action was? That is going to be the situation that you're looking at. That makes sense? Yeah. Okay.
All right. Moving on to the next slide.
Yeah.
There are three principles for ethical decision making. Right. There's ends-based thinking. Thinking about the the result rather than what is taking place now. Philosophers refer to this as utilitarianism, best known by the maxim, do whatever produces the greatest good for the greatest number of people. Based on cost benefiting and analysis, determining who will be hurt and who helped at the heart of this principle is an assessment of consequences, a forecasting of outcomes. So do what you have to do now, but what you're doing benefit must be for the greater benefit of the greater number of persons, right? Rule-based thinking, categorical imperative. Follow only the principle that you want everyone else to follow. Ask yourself, if everyone in the world follow this rule of action I am following, would that create the greatest good for the greatest worth of character? Rule-based thinking is based firmly on duty and what we ought to do rather than what we think we might work. This is deontological thinking, meaning based on moral obligation. Right? Basically, do the right thing. And once you do the right thing, it is going to benefit the most amount of people.
But it's actually more along the lines of doing the rules based would be because the rules tell you so,
Yeah,
right? If the rule is this is what we're supposed to do, then we do this,
this we do this. Yeah,
right? That's what rules based thinking. So if these are the regulations that we're working under, then we have to follow them,
yeah. You
right?
you find this ethical level of thinking in policing organizations, for example. This is what the law says, and this is what we are going by.
That's why when you do legal studies, you come across the rule of law is absolute,
Yeah,
or no, the rule of law must prevail.
must be prevailing.
Yeah.
And then finally, care-based thinking, putting love of others first. The golden rule is an example of care-based thinking. Do unto others what you would have them do unto you. Care-based thinking puts the feature of reversibility into play. Test your actions by putting yourself in another's shoes and imagining how it would feel if you were the recipient rather than the perpetrator of your actions. You have to be empathetic. Have some empathy. All right. Moving on to the next slide. We moving on to Bucamp and Childress, 5 principles of biomedical ethics. They said respecting autonomy, providing leaders and members with freedom of choice, allowing individuals to freely develop their values and respecting the right of others to act independently. Autonomy, like constitutional rights and liberties, has conditions and does not imply unrestricted freedom. A major assumption of autonomy is that an individual possesses a certain level of competence to make rational and informed decisions. If within a group, you assemble a group of persons who you know have a certain high level of ethical standards, and you don't really have to do much oversight on them. You expect that they would do the right thing, and you respect and you just leave them to do what they have to do. Doing no harm or non malfeasance, right? Providing an environment that is free from harm to others, both psychological and physical. Leaders and members refrain from engaging in actions which risk harming others. Right? So you try to make the a decision that doesn't have much great impact, benefiting others or beneficence, promoting the interests of the organization above personal interests and self-gain. The notion of promoting what is good for the whole of the organization or community and promoting the growth of the group is upheld in the principle of beneficence. This is a challenging one, especially like in organizations where, like say where it is profit driven. Some people might decide to cut certain costs just to drive up profit because like as leaders, some leaders um they get bonuses and so on for achieving certain profit streams. Um, so they would cut costs as much as they can, but it have others who would do the right thing and try to probably keep certain people in the job and probably not make as much profit in the process. And finding a balance is the most important thing. Being just, right? Or justice. Treating people fairly and equally. This principle is traced to Aristotle's work on ethics, right? Then there's being faithful or fidelity, keeping promises, being faithful and being loyal to the group or organization. Being faithful is a principle premised on relationship and trust. If you as a leader or member violate the principles of fidelity, it is difficult or impossible for others to develop a trusting relationship, right? You must, as a leader, you must be able to stick to your words as much as possible. Because if you don't, people will realize you for who you are, and then you will find your following starting to wane and your influence as well. Um,
Now,
Next slide.
now what this slide really is talking to is that most organizations and professional bodies have developed their own set of ethical principles, because even now the accounting body, the international accounting body, they have developed their own list of ethical practices that they disseminate and make it a required paper for the accountancy training program.
Yeah.
The reason for that is because of course, coming out of the 2008 financial failure that took place, a lot of leaders got into very questionable circumstances in terms of how they were treating with their accounting practices. So they've developed that. But most fields have ethical principles. So like teaching, for example, we have a ethical standards that we have to measure up to. The doctors, the biomedical, that kind of crosses over from one to the other. If anybody's a nurse or knows nurses, nurses have an ethical standards, and it's actually embedded in their nursing pledge that
Yeah.
they join the service. Um, so each organization has developed their own ethical principles, but they all sit upon some very similar um, commonalities across the board. All right, regardless of the profession that you're in, the legal profession has its own ethical principles again. But if you do a comparison between them, you realize that there's a serious overlap. That's why we always say there's nothing like business ethics and legal ethics. The ethics is across the board. It's general studies.
Mm-hmm.
Ethical values are universal in nature. In fact, I think the chapter also spoke about those universal values that are considered to be universally accepted as good behavior across the board, regardless. All right. Okay. Your next slide. Go ahead. I hope you have the last one.
Yeah. All right. We just taking a moment to think for a second, right? Based on what we have discussed throughout the presentation, imagine what an organization, community, or the world would look like if everyone would strive to create and sustain an ethical environment by rewarding ethical acts, to engage in moral talk, and to carefully work as a group toward resolving dilemmas by using decision-making models. Think about it, and well, you could answer it in your own time.
Well, they will have to answer it in the midterm.
All right, moving on.
So to
Right.
conclude,
So before you conclude, hold on. There was one test that you left out. I just want to bring it. It's a not very critical one. It's called a newspaper test. It's a very informal system,
Oh yes,
right? Yeah.
yes, yes.
Think,
Think about
yeah, think about your actions in relation to if they were to write an article in it in newspapers or do a social media blast. Did
mhm,
you want that information being
out there.
um, broadcasted to the world? So
Yeah.
it's oftentimes if you use that perception or that decision making model, it helps to guide your behavior. All right. So move ahead with your conclusion, my dear.
yeah. So what this chapter basically was about is that leading with integrity is a complex process that includes the moral development of an individual, the influence of role models, values-driven leadership, and the organizational environment. The process of developing into an ethical participant and creating ethical environment does not occur overnight. Groups and organizations are made up of humans who can do and make mistakes, which is part of the learning process. Raising questions around ethical issues is a fundamental component of leading with integrity. People who lead with moral purpose often have as many questions as answers. Leading from the relational leadership model means leading with moral purpose, empowering others to lead by example, including other participants, and resolving ethical dilemmas, acting ethically to positively affecting the public good, and usually using the process to approach problems that do not offer clear solutions. Our society is calling for leaders and participants alike who can be trusted and who are committed to doing the right thing. Despite the turbulent and fast-paced nature of our world, leading with moral purpose is central to the leadership process. And this is our reference, which we reference the book. And that's the end. Thank you guys for listening.
Thank you very much.
Does anybody have any questions they'd like to ask?
Yes, sir, I have one question for Whitney.
What's that?
Whitney,
Hi.
as a shopper of Superfarm Westmall, I have come up with many ways of how to clear out, like one of the shelves with all those lovely cosmetics that you all have, how to get it fit on them on top, Have you ever had an ethical dilemma like that where, you think of removing items on the store without paying for it as a staff?
You mean like stealing?
Well, yes, and want of a better word.
I think that's stealing. But I'm only human. It had passed through my mind many times, but when I actually sit down and think about the consequences that I will be putting myself in, because one, we have cameras through the entire store that is always monitored daily. I don't want to be in that situation. I have many times where it happened to individuals, my co-workers, where they got in trouble, they got suspended, and all these different things. And to me, we have it at Superfarm, we have CSA 1s, 2s, and 3s. And I'm a CSA 2, so I have to set the example for the ones below me and try to move my way up to a CSA 3, which I am soon will be in the future. So doing that, I can't really be thinking that kind of unethical, because I am only human. We all think unethical at some point in time, but doing that is not in my playing field.
All right. So if you listen to what she said there, you'd realize that she's using short-term versus long-term to make her argument. You seeing that? She's classifying her dilemma or that dilemma situation. In a short term, it might be beneficial, but in the long term, it is not. All right, and she's then employing rules-based the rules-based thinking in terms of her paradigm. So these are the rules, and she's going to follow the rules because they will in turn reward her for her situation, for being loyal to the organization and stuff like that. And therefore you can also say she's being loyal to the organization. So there are a number of arguments or paradigms or frameworks you could look at that decision that she's made there. That's an excellent response, Whitney.
Thank you.
Who was that who was asking that question?
Anne-Marie.
Anne-Marie, what are you trying to do?
So what? It was just an idea. It just, came off the top of your head a few times. You're going. So have you ever been to Superfarm Westmall? When you walk into there, it's like, wow.
Yeah, and
I've never attempted. Please note, sir, I have never attempted any such thing. I'm just saying, sometimes you're just like, wow.
All right, so listen to me very carefully, Anne-Marie, because obviously you did not realize that this is a recorded event. And when I post it onto YouTube, it's going to be published. So let's think of the newspaper test now. This is social media. So now your behavior is going to be posted in a public forum.
So we've seen her face, so I think she's safe.
Well,
and you didn't mention my last name, so please don't. Thank you. Hi.
All right, Miss Wren. All right, I'm gonna pause the video now, okay?